Today on Tree Hang Paint the Game, we're going to take a longer and more detailed look at painting the non-metallic bronze on this moonlit ogre. We will be using a simple palette to paint up this non-metallic metal. Army Green by Army Painter, Ice Yellow by Vallejo, Matte Black, and Matte White. After base coating all of the metal parts in matte black, I'm going to mix up a 50-50 blend of the matte black and army green, and this mix will be thinned a little bit with water. I'm going to cover nearly all of the metallic areas with this paint, leaving only the deepest recesses and darkest shadows pure black. Because of the translucent nature of acrylic paint, the first coat is going to still read very black in color. I'm going to apply several coats of the black and green mix, covering a little less area each time and allowing the deepest shadows to grow larger. I recorded painting this non-metallic bronze in one clip, and I was able to see from the raw footage that the entire process took me exactly 29 minutes. Because of the large amount of area that I'm covering with this initial color blend, I'm able to be pretty free with my brush strokes, and it moves along pretty quickly. Normally when painting non-metallic metal, you have to wait idly while one coat dries before applying the next coat. But fortunately with this ogre, there are so many metallic parts on it that by the time I am done applying paint to each one of them, I'm able to go back to the first part and start working on it immediately. After about 3 coats, it's really starting to take on that dark green hue that is going to be the base for our non-metallic bronze. This entire non-metallic bronze process is going to be accomplished in 5 steps with the 4 colors that we have on our palette, where we are basically going to be moving from a single color to a mix of 2 adjacent colors, then back to a single color, and then to a mix of 2 adjacent colors, and so on. So we'll be moving from black and green in this first step to just the army green in the next step, and then following that we will use a mix of the army green and ice yellow, followed by just ice yellow, then a mix of ice yellow and white, and finally just a few dots of pure matte white. And now that we have our brush loaded up with pure army green, thinned a little bit with water, I'm really starting to pay attention to how I'm forming the highlights of this non-metallic metal. For example, on each of the ogre's armlets, I'm going to have 2 bands of reflective light running vertical on the armbands. They're going to be separated by a near black shadow in between. I use short brush strokes to apply the paint perpendicular to the length of the reflection. If you can imagine his bracelets as a sliver of a longer cylinder, I would be applying the brush strokes and the paint across the thin part of the cylinder rather than down the length of the cylinder. Every other piece of his armor that has a cylindrical shape is going to be treated in the same way. And at this point in the process, I will also be applying edge highlights to any of the pieces that have sharp edges. I also want to point out that you're seeing real-time footage of the complete painting process. All that I've cut out is the time I spent cleaning brushes, mixing some of the paint together, and there were a few areas of the footage that were just far too blurry to be included in this tutorial. And curved pieces like these rings are treated in much the same way as the cylindrical items, mostly because that's what they are. I'm going to draw the highlights across the short cross-section of the ring rather than drawing a line along its length. And here I'm just throwing on some more edge highlights on the plates on his chest as well as that thing hanging between his legs. Can't believe I just said that. Now that we've added ice yellow to the army green, we will see the non-metallic metal starting to take shape. I will continue to focus on the 2 bands of light on each armlet, adding the paint to a smaller area in just 1 or 2 coats. Edge highlighting on the objects with sharp edges will not be reduced too much at this point since we still have 2 more highlighting steps to go. You'll also notice that all the steps in this process have been a basic layering technique, using thin paints and then covering less area with each coat. I will most likely do 1 unifying glaze at the end of the process to tie everything together and to reduce some of the chalkiness that presents itself when working with ice yellow and matte white. This method may not be what you want to use if entering a miniature painting competition, but the trade-off is the amount of time that you save doing this. I'm talking about spending 29 minutes painting over a dozen metal bits and bobs on this miniature, whereas you could spend upwards of 8 hours painting a single sword for a miniature that you're putting into a competition. And while I do like striking a balance between quality of output and time invested in a piece, I do think that if you've fallen in love with this hobby, you should experience painting a 100-hour miniature at least once in your life. The final results of this non-metallic bronze is going to have an oil-rubbed bronze appearance. To make it appear as a highly polished, clean metal, you would definitely have to apply a few more glazes, or a lot more glazes. So let me know what you think about this more detailed approach to doing tutorials. Is it too much repetition? Is it too boring watching me repeat the same process over and over again, doing all these separate layers? Or is this something that you find useful? Also, let me know what other board games you would like to see painted up. So far, I have plans for Marvel Zombies, Cthulhu Death May Die, and Frosthaven, but let me know what other board games you would like to see painted. Or just vote for your favorite out of those three. And while I'm asking you to do a bunch of stuff, right now would be a good time to ask you to like the video and please subscribe to my channel. Moving into the next highlight step, we're going to use pure ice yellow thinned with water. As is par for the course, I'm covering less and less area with each coat of paint. The typical approach to painting a miniature, where you base coat the entire miniature followed by some shading, and then in the third step you go back and you highlight the entire miniature, doesn't really work for my psyche when it comes to painting miniatures. I really prefer focusing on just one element of the miniature at a time, whether that's the skin or the metal parts of the sculpt. I find that this allows me to become much more absorbed in the creative process as I bring different parts of the miniature to life. If a project includes non-metallic metal, I typically prefer waiting till the end to paint that, as painting the non-metallic metal early in the process could lead to frustration if an errant brushstroke later in the painting process destroys all that hard work. Another thing that I find helps when painting non-metallic metal is to keep a very limited palette. Having just one or two colors in addition to the black and white almost forces you to make the high jumps in value that's required for an object to read as non-metallic metal, going from nearly black in the darkest shadows to nearly white at the brightest highlights. And while you can certainly use a single color such as a mid-tone blue or green in addition to the black and white to achieve a stellar non-metallic metal finish, I decided to also include the ice yellow, as I felt that this would work well with the army green to really deliver that bronze finish. Adding matte white into the ice yellow will act as our final proper highlight and will be applied quite sparingly. One thing that I found surprising after filming myself painting a miniature was how little time I actually spent painting this miniature. While the process of painting the non-metallic metal took me half an hour, only about 1/3 of that time was spent actually putting paint on the miniature, with the remainder of that time focused on maintaining the brush and mixing paint. Before I started recording myself painting, I would have guessed that that ratio would have been flip-flopped in favor of spending more time putting paint on the miniature. I'm really starting to like how the Ogre's bracelets are turning out. The high jumps in value are really starting to sell the non-metallic metal. However, now that we're into the pure ice yellow, I am noticing that the finish is turning out a little bit chalky. So we will be going back and doing a little glaze over it at the end to sort of tie everything together. We are now using pure matte white to add little glints of reflecting light to the non-metallic metal. However, not every metal piece on this miniature is going to get this extreme highlight. I'm going to select pieces that are sticking out on the lower portion of the miniature, as well as the pieces that are located higher up on the miniature. And I'm going to select a location on each piece that makes it look like the light is reflecting towards the viewer's eye. And now that we have the final highlights where we want them, it's time to tie everything together with one light glaze. This glaze is going to be made up of the ice yellow and army green, and it's going to be very watered down. It's going to be more of a tint than a glaze, and we're going to apply this starting from the light area, working towards the dark area. And now we step back and take a look with fresh eyes and see where we may need to reapply some of those highlights. At this point, we're very selective with our final highlights, as we will not be going over this again with another glaze. I know that I've been referring to this as non-metallic bronze throughout this video. However, after looking at it, I changed my mind. I am now calling this brushed brass. After taking a minute or so to knock out these final highlights, we will take one last look at our brushed brass non-metallic metal before calling it done. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial on painting up some old brushed brass non-metallic metal. Please be sure to check out the other two videos in this series where I completely paint up this moonlit ogre.